NBC News. Around the world and into your home. The stories that touch your life. With Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters. This is 2020.
It's the American dream of justice. You feel you've been wronged, you go to court, you win your case, and you walk away with damages, money to compensate you for your troubles. That's the way the system works, and that is what happened to the people you're about to meet. So why are they unhappy? Well, that's what this story is about.
These workers are among thousands who won billions of dollars after they were exposed to a dangerous product at work. But who got rich on the settlements and who suffered? Not the people you might expect. John Stossel's report raises an important question. Just whom is our legal system designed to help? And by the way, if there are any lawyers out there watching, better keep an eye on your blood pressure.
How many millions of dollars would you have to buy the Baltimore Orioles? And maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, too.
It is a touchdown, Tampa Bay!
To occupy an entire floor in this modern skyscraper, or own a 9,000 square foot home on this exclusive South Carolina island. Well, if you're this lawyer or that one, you could have all those things and more, largely because of the world's most expensive and longest court battle. A battle that's been waged now for almost a quarter of a century, and it's far from over.
The issue of conflict of interest?
Just before Christmas, when a judge ruled in just one more phase of this battle, a court noted that another 55 years is still needed to settle other victims' claims. This is a story about winners and losers, and there are plenty of losers. Injured workers and their families, bankrupt companies, unemployed workers, and the big winners, some very rich lawyers. This battle began because of asbestos. It's a natural substance that may be the world's best insulator. Though asbestos frightens us today and the EPA ordered its use phased out by next year, 20 years ago it was common to everyone's life. It was in hair dryers, ceiling tiles, skyscrapers, ships, spaceships, brake linings. It's still being put in brake linings. But in large doses, asbestos, if you inhale it, is deadly. And because of that, today, thousands of asbestos workers and their families are sick.
They never told us it was dangerous.
Ted Kowalski worked for Johns Manville, the world's biggest maker of asbestos. He spent years breathing what looked like snow.
I worked in E building, you could say it was like a flour mill, because everything was white, like snow.
My kids and the neighbors' kids used to go there and pick up it and play snowballs.
And they would put their tongues out and catch the white flakes that came down, not knowing that it would cause cancer or illness.
If it melted, it was snow. If it didn't melt, it was JM. They did not call it asbestos.
It makes me mad. They should all be locked up, every one of them. They knowingly exposed their workers and their families to the killer asbestos.
Of course, at the time, it wasn't widely known that asbestos was a killer. The government hadn't banned it, and no one knew for sure whether people exposed to small amounts were at risk. Still, by the mid-'70s, evidence of the risk was growing. Manville and other companies were getting out of the business. It was only then, afterwards, that the lawsuits started pouring in. One stated purpose of such suits is to stop companies from doing bad things. Well, these lawsuits didn't really do that because the companies had already stopped. Another purpose is to compensate victims, to take money from the bad guys and quickly give it to the people they've harmed. As you'll see, in most cases, that's not what happened either.
We had peanuts after lawyers got through with us.
Hundreds of thousands of lawsuits were filed on behalf of asbestos victims. Courts were so overwhelmed that the cases were bundled together into class actions. That's when a few select lawyers represent thousands of clients in a single case. In that case I mentioned earlier, a handful of lawyers represent some 500,000 clients. Are all of them really asbestos victims? Maybe not. Being a client doesn't automatically mean you're sick. Lawyer Peter Angelos recruited most of his clients in union halls and factories in Maryland. Other lawyers advertised for theirs. Even people who are not sick are being signed up. The lawyers argue one day they might get sick. Well, they might, but almost all of us has some asbestos in our lungs just from breathing urban air, being near cars. That doesn't mean we'll get sick. Facing thousands of claims from workers, sick or not, Manville and 16 other companies just declared bankruptcy. Where there were once jobs, there are now closed factories. Some of the bankrupt companies continued operating in smaller form. Some, like Johns Manville, reemerged from Chapter 11 to make all kinds of non-asbestos products. But thousands of jobs that had nothing to do with asbestos, have been lost. The asbestos companies did set billions of dollars aside to pay the victims and their lawyers. But the litigation costs were so high that most victims didn't get much. These workers were represented by a number of different lawyers.
As of today, I have received 7 settlements from 7 different asbestos companies, and it does not total $15,000.
All total, I've got about 5,000 or 6,000 altogether from all these companies.
I was offered $12,000 about a year ago, and which $4,000 a lawyer would have got that.
The people who really made out have been the lawyers. In most cases, they didn't even have to go to trial, yet they kept about 1/3 of all settlements as their fee. Contingency fee, they call it.
I was told to call you.
We're told lawyer Ron Motley will collect around $300 million. Motley won't say what the real number is. Peter Angelos won't say either, though we're told he'll get several $100 million, too. All the lawyers are secretive about what they'll get. They point out that if they hadn't won, they'd get nothing. A law review article says some are earning the equivalent of $30,000 per hour. In any case, under the contingency fee arrangement, Angelos should make more than enough to go shopping for that football team to go with the baseball team he's already bought.
That arrangement has been prevalent in America, the United States of America, for 150 years. That's the system. That's the American system.
But the result is that you have one of the most lavish offices in Baltimore. You've got your marble conference table. You've got your it's not marble, granite. You've got these lavish offices.
Yeah.
You've bought yourself a grown-up toy, a baseball team. You're rich. Companies are broke. And the victims don't get much.
That isn't true. The last thing you said is not true. Our clients have recovered tens of thousands of dollars.
Even tens of thousands versus what you had.
But I'm proud and satisfied to say that whatever profits that we enjoy, we have derived by helping people, not injuring or killing people.
But you are injuring people. 17 big companies closed down. Thousands of people are out of jobs so that you can get rich.
The purpose of bringing the litigation was not for me to get rich. It was for the purpose of compensating the victims of these companies. If some people have lost their jobs because of that, certainly we did not intend that result. But nonetheless, we can't be held responsible for that.
With most big asbestos makers bankrupt, lawyers began to look for others to sue. They went after smaller companies like Keene Corporation. Keene's now an empty shell, employing just 6 people in nearly empty offices. Keene was once a thriving company, employing 4,000 people, making all kinds of useful things. But years ago, company president Glenn Bailey made a big mistake. He bought a little company that made ceiling panels, and the panels contained asbestos. Now, this was just a tiny part of Keene's business, but under American law, that doesn't necessarily matter. You can sell $10 worth of asbestos and still be held responsible for millions in damages caused mostly by other producers that are already bankrupt. Hey, they're gone, you're not, so you have to pay.
We've been sued to death. We've been tortured to death.
Tortured, he says, by lawyers for people who helped build America's warships during World War II, who claim asbestos from Bailey's products made them sick. That's not fair, says Bailey. I didn't even own the company when the harm was done.
All this happened 25 years before we started the company is obscene. It's ridiculous.
But it's the law. There is a dispute over how much Bailey knew and when. Motley accuses him of hiding assets, among other things. Bailey denies it, and now he's suing Motley and Angelos and other lawyers.
People can't believe it when you tell them that you bought a company for $8 million and you spent $530 million on litigation with $320 million going to lawyers. Think of that. Lawyers got it.
I agree that for every dollar that a
asbestos company puts into a settlement, 65 cents goes to people other than the victim. But that doesn't mean that 65 cents goes to the plaintiff's lawyer. 35 cents of that dollar goes to Mr. Bailey's transaction cost to pay his lawyers.
Oh, yes, Bailey's defense lawyers are making out, too. And I should point out that insurance paid most of the $500 million. Bailey calls the whole process legalized extortion.
Let me say that I walk into your store and I say, give me $50 or I'm going to throw this brick through your window. Pretty clear.
That's extortion, but what's happening
now
to you?
suppose somebody walks in and says, look, I got 8,000 claimants here and I'm going to sue you unless you settle with me. And by the way, I may win only 0.5%, but if I do, it's going to wipe you out. And that's what I mean by extortion.
Well, I think they deserve to be bankrupt. Any company that would knowingly produce and market a product which they know to be harmful to human beings should be bankrupt.
Glenn Bailey didn't know.
Well, but Glenn Bailey did know.
Well, why would he have bought it?
Well, you'll have to ask him that question. Apparently,
he says he didn't know.
Well, that's what he says. But
he knowingly bought a company for $8 million when he was going to have to shell out $500 million to people like you?
Well, first place, he hasn't shelled out $500 million to people like me. I might say if he did pay the $500 million, I think it serves him right.
All this, of course, will have to be resolved in court, expensively. At one point, Bailey says he was spending $800,000 a week on asbestos litigation. In all, American firms have spent $9 billion so far, and about $6 billion of that has gone to the lawyers. And what does the litigation accomplish? Well, some victims have been paid, that's true, though it's taken years, and many did not live long enough to collect. Thousands are still waiting. Even some of the lawyers admit the system hasn't worked well.
My motivation now is to bring the asbestos lawsuits to an end, to set up an out-of-court settlement procedure where people can get paid within 6 months of their diagnosis, get paid full money, and the lawyers take a lot less.
Lawyers taking less would certainly help. In the meantime, the cost to America has been great. Cities lost industries, people lost jobs, and we now pay more for the things we buy. Insurers now charge more to cover liability risk, and companies pass that cost on to us.
You're a parasite. You feed off the productive members of society.
That's ridiculous.
All these bankrupt companies, you feed off them.
Let me tell you something. If it wasn't for lawyers, if it wasn't for the American lawyer, your basic civil rights today would be gone. But for the legal profession, sometimes stop and think, where would you be when confronted by a police officer who is unjustly accusing you of a crime? Where would you be if someone runs a stop sign and demolishes your car and leaves you helpless in a wheelchair? Where would you and any American be without the presence of the well-trained, well-committed American lawyer?
All right, well, in your deputy.
Well, I'm not going to ask you where you'd be, but it seems to me from watching so many of your reports that you don't like lawyers very much.
That's not true. Half of my friends are lawyers. From my years of consumer reporting, I often saw people were ripped off by a business and they'd go to a lawyer for help, and they later felt more ripped off by the legal system. I know of no other business where the customers so consistently get so little but get charged so much.
But there are pro bono lawyers, there are lawyers assigned...
That's a small part of the business.
Well, were these men doing anything illegal?
No, I'm not singling them out for that. There are lots of class action lawyers who do this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They just made more than most. But in many class actions, the lawyers get a lot, the customer gets very little. It's just the system.
Well, this certainly does seem to be disgraceful, but at least we know how you stand in general on lawyers. I hope you don't need one too soon. Thank you, John.